All right, well, thank you so much for just giving me a sense of who's in the room, because I think that will help me as I go through the materials here. As I kind of made a joke around it, it doesn't sound like that sexy of a topic, and the truth is it is such a foundational cornerstone to the success of many of our organizations, and I am passionate about many aspects of succession planning, because I think it's fun and it's exciting, and so let's take a look at some of those different areas. This area of succession planning also is huge. There are a lot of books out there, there's a lot of topics on it, and a lot of the books, if you read them, I don't know, but they're really statistically driven. It's scary. Like, you open them up and there's just numbers and stuff like that everywhere, and I'm like, really? What does this have to do with succession planning? So my style is, let's take a look at what does that mean for us, and let's extract what those numbers mean, and then let's take a look at how do we actually apply it, and what does that mean for our very busy everyday lives in the nonprofit arena that you guys live in, okay? There's way more information in here than we have time to really kind of fully delve into, and I felt like it might be helpful to have a resource and be able to kind of go back. Some of the slides are very self-explanatory, so feel free to kind of just, go back and look through those. My contact information is on the front of the very front slide, so you feel free to give me a call if you have any questions, and or want to kind of talk through any of the other concepts that we talk about through the session. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's just take a look at some of the statistics, and I am totally going to be right in the way.
No, that's all right. Don't worry about me.
All right, so I'll try to.
You need to be on camera.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm moving too much. Oh man, not only do my training style is I do a lot of leadership and communication training, so I don't use PowerPoint. I like to be in with people and talking and mushing stuff around. So I'm techno stuff. All right, so here are just some of the statistics that, I gathered these years ago, and amazingly, they're almost, now happening in terms of the 2012, that this older segment of the workforce will have increased to 19.1%. And really what that means is our baby boomers ultimately, as we all well know, are getting to the point which they're wanting to retire. What's interesting what that means for you as a nonprofit organization, what I've seen for nonprofits is you as executive directors started in your positions, and then, tell me if this is true, you grew in your position, and when you took on new responsibilities, you didn't necessarily let go of the other ones, right? So then you just have this job and that job, and then you have this job and that job and that job, right? And now you have the executive director position, and you have a whole bunch of responsibilities. And so really taking a look at who is someone that could come in and fill your shoes, it's quite daunting sometimes to think about that, because you have grown this position and you have made it your own, and you have figured out how to make it work and balance all of those different roles, because you've had to, because you're a nonprofit and you have amazing hearts and gifts and compassion to be able to do all of this. And yet now you're looking at this going, wow, what do we do in terms of succession planning? How do I get people ready to take on this role as it is today? And sometimes what you're going to have to do is you're going to potentially have to redefine that role a little bit and take a look at, sometimes succession planning is about reorging the organization and taking a look at how do we need to take a look at roles and responsibilities, not necessarily just putting some, figuring out how to get somebody up into that next position. How many companies have succession plans? Not that many, actually. As much of a topic of conversation that it is for many organizations, many companies don't have them. Even our really large corporations don't have succession plans. So if you don't feel bad, because you're right there along with the rest of us. I think a lot of times we have succession plans in our head, and we've thought about, what would happen, or if I won the lottery, and who would take my position, or whatever the case may be. We've thought about those things kind of in passing, and that's the extent of our succession plan. So I think it is important, and I'm glad that you guys are here to just begin thinking about it. What is succession planning? So I took a look at a lot of definitions out there, and over the last, probably 10, 12 years, been taking a look at what does it really mean, and how do we pull this together. And so this is the definition that I like to work off of. It's a process designed to ensure the continued effective performance of an organization by creating a steady and reliable pipeline of talent that will meet its future needs in leadership and other key roles. There's a couple aspects to this that are really important for us to take a look at. It's about the success of the organization. It's not just about replacing you. It's about how do we keep the organization moving forward? How do we help the organization continue to succeed? We will talk about those kind of competencies that you need to develop. And the other key piece here is it's not just leadership roles, but it's key roles within the organization. So I want you to broaden your thought process in terms of succession planning as just leadership. There's key positions, and we'll talk about those. Here's a great graph in terms of the evolution of succession planning, where it has been in the past and where it is now today as we take a look at it with our organizations. Oh, and I wanted to tell you, if you have a question, stop me. Like I'm groovy with that. Okay, all right. It used to be an annual event for many organizations where we would just sit down. Sometimes the performance appraisal time, or performance documentation, whatever it might be, just sit down and talk to somebody. Sometimes some organizations had that secret meeting in the basement of the building where they had the pictures of the high potentials all around the walls. Seriously, they do this, and then they talk about the high potentials and what they're going to do with them this next year, and where they want to develop them to, or whatever the case may be. So there's some organizations that actually still do that, and what we know is that it's transferred from that annual event to an ongoing process. Succession planning needs to be in the fabric of everything that you do as an organization, from how you hire, to how you train people, to how you hold them accountable, and then taking a look at what does that mean for us long term. So you're building a culture of development, not just an annual event. It's gone from that selection of replacements only. That's what we used to think about in terms of succession planning. It's, tap on the shoulder, you're next. It's gone from that to more of what we call a leadership pool. Now, let me be clear. I get your organizations aren't big enough to have a leadership pool to be able to do that. The concepts that I will talk to you about in terms of from the leadership pool, I think there are many applicable concepts that you can extract from that for your organizations, though. So we have used to only focus on those senior level positions only, and now we're taking a look at all positions within the organization, including those key positions. It used to be a standalone program, but as I mentioned, it's now part of an integrated strategy. And the return used to be on the future, but you guys know this. You have to show that you're doing something today, not just in the future. I mean, that's with your grants, that's with everything that you do. So it's the same with succession planning. We need to see the results today, not just 5 years from now. What it is not an HR-only initiative. This is an initiative that has to come through the entire organization. It has to be executive-driven, but line-owned. Does that make sense? Like your executive leaders have to be bought into it, have to be driving it, have to talk about development, have to support development in terms of for folks. And the folks in the front line, those leaderships and the supervisors who are on the front line have to be the ones that are carrying it out every day in alignment with it. It is not a tactical event or a once-yearly program. It's not a process to just appoint the heir apparent. There are times when you're going to do that because that's what you have to do, okay? And it's not a performance-only or development-only process. It's a much bigger process than that. It is a strategic planning process. I want you to think about it in terms of where do you want to be 2 to 3 years from now as an organization? Where is that? And we'll talk about that. You want to figure out what does that look like for you? Do you need to grow? Are you going to be having, in terms of are you going to have folks retiring? Are you going to be expanding? What does that look like for you? Because that's part of your strategic plan. What are the skills and tools you need people to have to take you where you need to go 3 years from now, not just where you got today? So it's part of that strategic planning process. It is a change management process because for many of you, this hasn't necessarily been the way that you've done it in the past. We've just kind of talked about it and then someone leaves and then we do some interviews and we kind of hire somebody else and that's kind of been the process. Well, potentially, you might want to shift and change that in terms of your cultural change process as well. So what does that mean for organizations? Do we go changing from how we've done it to where we want to be in terms of our culture of learning is a cultural change process in addition. It is a performance management process. It needs to be linked in with performance management. It's a talent, human capital process and a development process. It's like I talked about, it kind of needs to be woven into the fabric of everything within your organization. let's talk a little bit about what are some key positions, okay? Because we mentioned that it's not only leadership, but it's also key positions. So, positions defined by organizational responsibility. This is that leadership component. So, executive directors, department heads, division heads. So I would say everyone in this room would probably fall mostly in that category in terms of positions defined by organizational responsibility. Those are the ones that we traditionally think of for succession planning. Positions defined by potential impact on the business, okay? So technical knowledge, they possess critical technical or unique business skills that would require extensive development of a replacement candidate. Okay? So they may have some technical skills that it's really hard for you to potentially just, hire somebody else. So you're going to think about what do I need to do to develop succession planning for that person? Financial impact, significant bottom line impact. So the session before mine was on fund development, right? So if you have someone in your organization who's been doing some of that work, and they have that, the other piece too is the external relations component. Sometimes some of that fund development is all linked to, and my guess is who do you know and what are those relationships and how do we cultivate that? And if that person leaves, sometimes that can leave us in a little bit of a lurch because we don't have that connection or that external component. So how do we continue to develop the relationships with the organization in addition to just that one person so that we build that strong link with one another? So the external relationships as well. And then strategic impact, positions that for emerging strategies. So let's say you're going to be expanding or you're going to be doing a whole new service and there's a person who's leading that charge. That person has an impact on the strategy of your organization probably in terms of it. So what are you going to do to support them in terms of if they decide to leave or something happens in their life? What is your plan in terms of supporting that succession plan? Okay, questions so far? The case for internal promotions, there's a lot of benefits to doing internal promotions. And what I will say at this point for many of your organizations, that's not necessarily an option. So let's just put that on the table. So for succession planning, of course we want to take a look at internal promotions and how to develop people from inside and all of that. And sometimes your succession plan is having a really good concrete position description defined with good competencies and job responsibilities, because when you leave, let's say as an executive director, you don't have anybody within the organization that has those skills. So your succession plan is replacement planning from the outside. That's your succession plan. At least you know it, right? At least you know that that's where you're going to need to go, and these are the skills that we're going to look for when we need to go hire, okay? If you have somebody internally, fabulous. Let's take a look at what do I need to do to start to get this person ready over the next couple of years to be able to step into that position. Okay? So here's just a couple of statistics that you guys can take a look at in terms of hiring from the inside. Interesting that 66% of senior managers hired from the outside usually fail within the first 18 months. Why do you think that's true? Overwhelmed.
They don't know the organization.
They don't know the organization. Cultural fits too, right? Yeah. I mean, you guys have a unique culture in terms of how you support your clients and how you work together and what you do. And if they're not used to that or can't work within the flexibility of that, in terms of how your boards are set up and how you service, I mean, there's a lot of complexities to your culture. So if they can't adapt to that, potentially then that's not going to be a great fit for them to be within your organization. To me, this is probably hopefully one of the most helpful slides that we're going to talk about here today. I'm so sorry.
You're fine. I can read.
You can read.
Don't worry about me.
Succession planning, as I mentioned, is this huge topic, and you can go a million different directions with it. This, to me, boils it down to a pretty simple way of thinking about it. There are three types of succession planning, as I've kind of gathered over the years. The first one is emergency planning, and this is a plan to cover the sudden or unexpected absence of a leader or key position. This is if somebody wins the lottery and they're gone tomorrow. I like that better than being hit by the bus, don't you? It's a little bit more positive. So what if somebody leaves unexpectedly? what's the emergency plan? And especially for you executive directors in the room, it's pretty critical for oftentimes for that role, especially because your role is so complex in terms of what you do and the types of relationships that you have, and you know, who are your contacts and who do you know and where's this information found. So emergency planning, I've given you some links to some sample sites that I found on the internet, and just a little bit I'll show you those, that you can take a look at some sample emergency plans for executive directors and the nonprofits and that type of thing. But this is also for key positions. You know, where do you put your files, right? And who do you contact for this program over there at that school? We don't know. So how are we going to find out that? What do we need to do in an emergency? Okay, whether it's temporary or longer or a long-term fill, we need to have some of that put into place to begin with. Replacement planning. Replacement planning is the traditional tap on the shoulder, you're next. Now with replacement planning, there is an assumption that your organizational chart will remain unchanged probably for like this next 6 months to a year. And what that means is that, you know, so-and-so, this position reports to that position and this position reports to that position. So that if I tap you on the shoulder and I say, you know, in my mind I'm thinking you're next, that there's going to be a position there in this same capacity that you would potentially step into. And for many of your organizations, I'd say that's probably pretty realistic that your org chart wouldn't necessarily change. There's some organizations out there that change their org chart weekly, and people have to go onto the internet to find out who their supervisor is for that week. I'm not kidding you. So if you like stability, that's probably not the place to be, right? So for your organizations, my guess is replacement planning is going to be a very important part of your succession planning, okay? Now, acceleration pool development is a newer focus over the last 10 years. This doesn't necessarily apply to you because you're so small within your organizations. And as I mentioned, there are some key aspects to it that I think are really helpful to take a look at. Acceleration pool development is when we get a group of people together and you develop a pool of leaders so that when you need to replace a potential position, you have several different individuals that you can pull from. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because you don't necessarily, and it's kind of risky to put all your eggs in one basket, and you know, what happens if that person then decides to leave, and now what do I do? Well, it makes sense to have that. And you have to be large enough to actually have enough people to do an acceleration pool development. Here's what most of the companies I work with do. Usually what they'll do is get some sort of an emergency plan kind of in place and just get some of those key positions down. And then what we do is they take a look at their replacement planning candidates, but they put them into a development pool together, and they train them together as an acceleration pool, yet in essence what they're doing is just doing replacement planning development. Does that make sense a little bit? So one of the things that might be interesting for all of you is that how do you support each other in developing your leaders with each other? Even though you're distance-wise, it's challenging. Are there ways for you to connect via technology? Are there ways for you to connect versus webinars, book clubs, over the conference calls, where you guys can support each other in terms of the development at your different sites to share experiences that you're having in those different levels of leaders in terms of case scenarios and what are you guys doing to handle it, and here's what I learned. And I don't know, I think that there might be some opportunities for you to support each other around from that perspective. Some organizations have done that I've worked with. They're usually, usually within the same metro area, and they'll actually pull their folks together to do what we call the Leadership Academy together. And that's just a way to kind of save money as well as support one another. Okay, questions on those three? Make sense? All right, emergency planning. Here are some links to those emergency plans that I mentioned. We are in the process at Mountain States of trying to develop some sample templates for you to use as well, and so hopefully sometime this year we'll have those out to you. If you are members of the council, you'll have access to those. Okay? Here's a way to do replacement planning. Does anyone here have a replacement planning chart? No? Have you ever seen one? Yeah? Okay.
Actually working with a client on this right now.
Working with a client on this right now? Okay. So replacement planning chart is pretty, what I like about it is it doesn't take much. This is it. The tool, right? Excuse me. And here's what happens basically. So this is just a So this was for a city and county, let's say, but you might have your executive director position up here. So this is your org chart, right? And you fill out your org chart, and then what you do is you take a look at what's the replacement need code for this particular person. Do I need to replace them now? Is it probably within a year, 2 to 5 years, or no foreseeable need? What are we looking at here? Kind of giving yourself a scope within your organization of, you know, what do we think? Now, of course, you don't know for sure, and you can't go and ask and say exactly what date are you retiring, right? In terms of that, or you know, are you going to be here or not? We just can't do that kind of thing. But we can kind of have a guess, right? In terms of what might happen, or different positions might move, or we might be expanding. We might need this position to move over there to support the new expansion of this project, whatever the case may be. Over here is the promotion potential. So what you do is you identify a candidate or two and you put their names underneath it. Now for you guys, it probably might just be one because you're probably small enough that it might be one name underneath there. And then what you do is you say, you give them a code. Are they qualified now? Could be qualified within the next 6 months. Could be qualified in 1 to 2 years. Qualification is uncertain but best available. If we need it, this is what we've got. Right? And sometimes we got to go with best available. No, absolutely. So, and sometimes the truth is though those best available, at least they know the culture of your organization. They know that the kind of the relationships. Maybe they just need some of that really kind of high focused intensity development on their skill sets in terms of knowledge as well as skills. Fabulous. Well, let's figure out how to get them that if they're in that category. Okay, so this is what you do. Do you share this with the entire organization?
No.
Not necessary, right? This is for your eyes only. I would say, not your eyes only, but probably you or HR or whomever kind of plays a similar supportive role within your organization. Usually what you'll do is some of your supervisors will send you who they think and kind of do the coding of it. Do they need to tell those people that they're like tapped on the shoulder? No. Because what that really does is we don't want to not tell them, but what's happened sometimes is people have that entitlement piece of, well, I was supposed to be in my job, and it is well, it's not a guarantee, I just see some potential in you. And so the way I think of handling it is through your performance development process. Let's take a look at what skills we need to develop to continue to develop your skills for the next level within the organization. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Let's take a look at how to do that. You frame it in the context of developing them as a leader, not necessarily in terms of, hey, I've got your name on this sheet of paper. This is really helpful, though, for you as an organization, as leaders, to take a look at what's going to happen with my organization and what kind of plan do I have. Okay. Questions around replacement planning charts? Acceleration pool development then is a set number of people that go through who go through a program intact. And what we do is it's a comprehensive integrated program, okay? Where we do 360 assessments and coaching and mentoring and year-long assignments and training classes, and we do application assignments, and I'll show you some of those options in a little bit. And it's very intensive, and we take this group of people and we put them through the acceleration pool development process. As I mentioned to you from just a second ago, lots of times what organizations are doing is they're taking their replacement planning folks that are kind of on here, in essence, and then they're putting them through an acceleration pool development program, okay? Other organizations, most organizations I would say too, is just open up the process to anybody who wants to apply, and then you start to see who has that initiative and that excitement around it, and you start to see them blossom in terms of those skills, because some of them we wouldn't have necessarily identified to begin with, but because they self-identified and then they really took hold in terms of the development, we see a whole new potential in terms of that person. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of get people within this acceleration pool development. Oops, I think I might go the wrong way. There we go. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here. Basically, when I go through and I support organizations through taking a look at whether we start a leadership academy or acceleration pool or emergency planning, first thing you got to do is you got to have a leadership profile. What does a successful leader look like within your organization? Or what does that successful position look like? What do you do? I mean, you EDs in this room, keep track for an entire month of everything you do, right? What are the tasks you do? What are the skills that it took to do that? If you had developed, like if you were able to say to your board, you know, here's what I do, and here are the skills that it takes in order to be able to do what it is that I do, right? And for some of you, you've been doing it for so long, you don't even know what skills it takes because it's so ingrained in terms of who you are, okay? But take some time to think about, what do I do? I'm exhausted. What do I do every day? And how do I do it? And what are the skills that are necessary, okay? You need to be politically savvy in terms of some things. You need to be, you know, relationship savvy, social intelligence savvy, emotional intelligence savvy. You need to know the inner workings of, you know, all of the governmental regulations. But there's just a lot of things you know that are just part of your everyday job. So start to keep track of that leadership profile of what do you do, and for you EDs, as you're starting to some of you might be looking at, you know, retirement and traveling and that type of thing. What kind of ED would help take the organization to the next level? What skills would you want in this position that maybe you didn't necessarily have, but you got by, or you found a way to support it, but it would be great if somebody had that in this position? What would that look like, okay? So thinking about that as well. Needs assessment, then you got to figure out, you know, here's the ideal and where are people, and then where's our gap, right? Identify candidates. So on both sides of this, you do all of these different steps with emergency planning, replacement planning, and acceleration pool development. They just look a little bit different, okay? So on all three succession plannings, you're going to do a leadership profile. You're going to do a needs assessment. You're going to identify your candidates. You're going to do gap analysis. You're going to do strategies to fill it, and you're going to assess your return on investment for both. They just might look a little bit different in terms of how you do that. Questions? We doing okay? Mm-hmm. Next 2 pages are some questions for you to consider, and we won't go through these today just because we have such a short time together. And I think they're pretty helpful for you to start thinking about in terms of for your organization. What does it mean to your organization? What is your current leadership selection practice? How your current performance management process fits with succession planning? Current leadership development activities, what do you currently do? How do you measure, track performance, skills, and developmental needs? The intended scope of this process? And what's your culture as it relates to leader selection and integration? Okay? And that's a fascinating one. That one's sometimes harder to diagnose if you're in the culture. So it's, you know, how do we select people? And are they usually just by referral and people that we know, or do we search outside? And then once we get them on board, are we like, thank you for coming, here you go? Or do we, you know, support them through the development process for a little bit and then we let them go? I don't know. What does it look like in your organization? And what might it look like to be a little bit different? All right, so your managers on an everyday basis have a role in succession planning, as I talked about. Executive driven, line owned. So I love Stephen Droyer. If you haven't read The Leadership Pipeline, fabulous book on succession planning, I would highly recommend it. And he came out several years ago when we had a whole day conference on succession planning for the council, and he was our keynote speaker. And he talked about, from his book, but I love what he said. He said, when you take a leadership role, you are agreeing to make your people successful, make your business successful, and make yourself successful, okay? This is the most dramatic change in emphasis for leadership work in the last 10 years, is making your people successful, right? Because many of us, we think about, I think in my mind like the 4 quadrants of business. What we do, service or product that we do, how we organize ourselves, who we are individually, and how we relate to one another. Most of the time we hang out over in what we do and how we organize, right? Let's get it done. Let's, you know, what do we need to do to reorg? Let's get the process in place. Let's get this grant. What do we need to do to make sure that we fulfill this grant? How do we, you know, are we servicing the way we need to service? But we haven't always been as focused in terms of the people aspect of what do we need to do to develop the people. And that's that culture shift that we were mentioning at the beginning. Your manager's role, your supervisors, not just you folks here in the room. Of course this is part of your role, but it's everybody's role within the organization. Your job is to attract talent to the organization, so it's always looking out there in the community when you're working. Who are some of those good folks that I'm working with? Who would be fabulous if we needed them somewhere down the road to potentially work with us? Your job is to develop talent every day. It is an ongoing process, a conversation, a coaching conversation that happens every single day within the organization. And how do I retain talent? What do I need to do to make this an environment where you feel significant, competent, and likable in this organization so that you will thrive? What do I need to do? So let's take a look at leadership profiles for just a second. As I mentioned, it's a cornerstone aspect to the succession planning process. So what is a competency? Because that word has been thrown out a lot over probably the last 10 years, and people say it, and so what is it? Okay. It is a trait or set of behaviors. Procedural knowledge, not just declarative knowledge. So it's not just knowing things. And what I've seen in terms of, and I'll share this with you in terms of leadership development, is we can teach people, like I'm giving you kind of some procedural or declarative knowledge here. Like you guys are kind of gathering some information, but like how do you then go do this? Of course we need more than an hour to take some of that. Yet you know that work, right? Just from taking the grants that you get, and then what does it mean to really translate that into action? Your leaders need to be able to do the same thing. They need to be able to balance not only the knowledge that's here, but then being able to apply it. So both pieces. And being able to put concepts into action, as we said, the capacity and the skills component of that. When you design your competencies for your leaders, whether it's for yourself or it's for the key positions within your organization, design your competencies so that you have a combination of what we call leveraging indicators, skills aligned with today's job requirements, and future indicators, skills that would predict success in the future job or roles in the organization or moving the organization forward. Always balance the two. What would it take to make this job successful today, and what would it take to, where does this individual want to go? You could look at it from that perspective, or where do we need this position to take us in the future? Many organizations are realizing they need to kind of bring back innovation, okay? Because they've gotten too procedural in terms of how they're doing things, too process-driven. So they need to bring back in creativity and innovation to be able to adapt to the constantly changing world that they live in, right? So those are some of the core competencies that we're starting to train more now, is how do we create an organization that embodies and embraces innovation and creativity? So that's what that would be part of, you know, that leadership profile that you would be putting into place. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, as I mentioned, this is the model that we use for our leadership academies when we put leadership academies together. And I will tell you that this model, I would highly recommend you keep this in mind when you're developing anybody in your organization. It's not just for a leadership academy. If I were working with one particular individual, I would want to make sure I'm hitting all aspects on this triangle to make sure I'm developing them in the most comprehensive way that I can. The middle kind of orange triangle is your organizational culture, your guiding principles, your core values, your strategic plan. Who are you? What does it mean to be within your organization? How do you get work done? What's the culture like within your organization? That determines so much about how you guys get work done and your success as an organization, okay? Then at the top of it, what are the leadership behaviors? There are two core competencies that we focus on when we develop in our leadership academies as well as individually. The first one is self-mastery. We absolutely fundamentally believe that leadership comes from within. The first person that you have to lead is yourself. And you need to know, we as leaders need to know, what are the buttons that I have, and what are the needs that I have right now, and how am I handling this situation right now? Because my guess is all of you have been in those conversations where somebody has totally been like, all over you, and had no clue, right? And they don't know that that's their impact on people. And you feel yucky and gross as you walk away from each conversation. Anyone? So what we're talking about there is where's the self-awareness piece? Where's that self-mastery component in terms of what's my impact? How do I need to flex my communication right now? What is it that this conversation needs? What are my driving needs? Do I need to feel significant right now? Or is it about the project, or is it about me? Am I making the decision for me, or am I making it in the best interest of the organization? Whew. That's a lot of savvy, isn't it, to be able to kind of think through that, and critically important to success of leaders. Okay? Interpersonal mastery then is, how do I work with other people? I look at this as social and emotional intelligence, both, because emotional intelligence houses the self-mastery, social intelligence masters the interpersonal component of it, right? How do I have a difficult conversation? How do I get feedback? How do I coach? How do I work with folks? How do I negotiate for common interests versus positions? How do I do that? How do I collaborate with people? Bottom right-hand quadrant then, triangle down there, two aspects to this: organizational stewardship and business acumen. To me, they are very different. Organizational stewardship is then taking a look at, I look at this as the mission-driven leader. Do I, as a leader, know how to lead to the strategic plan of the organization? And do I know how to lead with those higher level thinking skills in terms of creativity, innovation, change management? Huge piece of organizational stewardship. How do I take not just my job and make it better? When I become a leader, how do I take my program and make it better? How do I have my team work better together, right? So it's taking that next level up and moving the organization forward. Okay? Business acumen skills are, how do I get business done? How do I get work done in my company, right? What does it look like? What's our processes for hiring? What's our processes for performance management? What's the processes for a grant application? What's the processes for reporting on a grant? What's the processes for working with the legislature? I don't know, all the pieces that you might have to do in terms of the responsibilities that you have. The business acumen aspect of, what does it look like to work in one of your centers? Okay? Now, over here is your functional technical competency, or the results-driven piece. These are the technical aspects of, in early childhood development, these are what you bring with you oftentimes, right? When you're hired, in terms of my knowledge and my skill around my actual job that I do, okay? So for you as executive directors, this looks a little bit different in terms of your functional and technical skills are all around that executive leadership level in terms of it. And the truth is, as Barb has mentioned to me, many of you get grants because your ED is one of the primary people on the grant, right? So that's another functional or technical skill that you bring is I service delivery, right? In terms of how to do this, or how to build programs, or how to do outreach, or whatever the case may be. It's the actual technical aspect of the job. Questions around that? When you develop your people, whether it's from replacement planning or emergency planning or acceleration full development, just check and see that you have all these different aspects. Are you doing it? Because lots of times folks will just focus here, right? Or they'll just focus on business acumen. Or they'll just focus on interpersonal mastery, right? And we hit a couple, but we don't always hit all of them. And then our leaders aren't necessarily prepared for what they need to face within the organization.
So are you saying that you recruit to this, or this is your business,
both
leadership? Because to what extent do you make the determination when you can't find all of those pieces in a person?
Absolutely. What a great question. So do I use this as my recruiting, in terms of hiring tool? I definitely use this first and foremost once they're on board and I'm developing them. So I use it as a development tool. Okay. Can we also look at it in terms of a hiring tool? I do think there's aspects to this, right? Mm-hmm. So to what level is this person self-aware at all? Right? Mm-hmm. And are they interested in it? And I'll show you a slide in just a second around that. Two is, how do they handle this? Like, what level do they have some interpersonal mastery? And y'all know, this is huge, isn't it? Mm-hmm. We say over at Mountain States that 70% of HR is recovering from bad hiring decisions, right? It's like, oh man, this person is creating chaos and pain for everybody in the system. You know, so what is it here? Do they have any of these skills depending on the level of the position? You know, business acumen, you're going to teach that piece once they come into the organization. And what skills do they have here? The biggest piece for you is, are they going to fit in here? Are they going to fit your culture? Do they know what it's really like to work long hours, not get paid probably phenomenally, you know, exactly like they would dream of potentially having in terms of it? What does that look like? Because what are the rewards, and what is the passion, and what's the energy in this organization, and how do we let them know that, and do they fit with that, or do they not? So does that help answer? This is a leadership pipeline model just to think about from Stephen Droder's book. As you think about, you manage yourself when you first come into the organization, and then you might need to manage others, and then he calls it, turn the corner again, and then there's a whole other level of, and then you're managing managers, right? And then you're managing those managers. It depends on how big your organization is. My guess is most of yours are pretty flat. But every time you turn that corner, there's different responsibilities, right? It's a different role. You have to look at things from a broader perspective. You have to know more about what's going on within the organization. Here's another way to look at something. You could do like a competency, like change management, and then you would say, what does that look like for an employee? You might say effectively implements change. Supervisor coordinates change. A manager identifies aspects of change that need to happen, right? A director level identifies when change needs to happen within the organization. So each level within the organization has a different role around change management. It's just another way to potentially define out competencies. All right. I'm going to go through. I know we're getting short on time. Couple key aspects I want to make sure I share with you, and then there's a whole bunch of slides at the end that you guys can just look at. This, to me, is key. Nothing else. This slide is so important. When we are looking for folks to develop in terms of high potential, whether we're hiring them from the outside or they're internal candidates, we oftentimes say, let's look at those high potential folks, right? Here's the deal. They may be a high potential person because they've been in that job for a long time and everything's pretty predictable to them. But if you took them out of that role and put them someplace else, okay, they may not necessarily be a great candidate for that. What we're looking for is something called learning agility, okay? The ability and willingness to learn from experiences, successes, mistakes, feedback, and exposures. There's a fabulous book on this called Mindset, okay? Mindset by Carol Dweck, D-V-Y-E-K, something like that. She talks about there's two basic mindsets of people in the world. And I don't know this is the exact language because I'm melding several different philosophies together, but it's open and closed. We'll just use it because that's easy to remember. Closed mindset individuals believe that their intelligences, the intelligences that they have, are limited. They're fixed. So therefore, if you critique me around something, and I believe that my intelligence is fixed and I can't learn it, I'm going to be much more protective around what I do and how I'm seen by people. So I usually get pretty defensive around it, okay? I get defensive around my competency, I justify what I do, I'm not opening to learning other things, this is the way it needs to be done. Does that make sense? So you might recognize yourself in this or some other folks in terms of that protective piece. There's open mindset of individuals as well. And the open mindset individuals have what we call the learning agility. They believe that their intelligences are able to be adapted and grown and changed. The cool news is, for all of us in the room, is that if you are a closed mindset, you can work to shift it towards an open. Okay, so you're not like stuck there. Okay? Open mindset individuals, what they've seen statistically over and over again as far as leaders go, far more successful as leaders than the closed mindset individuals. Far more. I mean, exponentially more successful as leaders. Because what that means is I learn from a mistake and I incorporate it and I go try again and I ask for feedback and I incorporate that feedback and I try again and I can take what I learned here and I can apply it to a different situation. Those are the people that we want. Those are the people that you want to hire in your organization because they're the ones that are going to be that adaptable, that person who's adaptable to being able to do it. So when I look at I may not, the hiring piece, if I don't have some of these other components, if I have somebody who has learning agility, you're set for much more success. Take a look at what level do you want to focus on in terms of development. Are you within your organization? Some of your organizations, you are really looking at your position as executive director or program lead and director in terms of that. What level are you looking at to do succession planning? You know, where's your greatest need that you need to focus in on? This is one other tool that I want to make sure to cover before we finish today. Has anyone ever heard of the 9-block model? Yeah, a couple of you. All right, here's what the 9-block model is. It's a very popular succession planning tool. And you know what? This is too small to read. Barb, will you remind me? I will email you a big copy and you can send it out to everybody? Okay. So basically what this says is, this is performance over time and results in behaviors, okay? So this is my performance. This is my potential down on the bottom, okay? So basically, your star performers are your high performers and your high potentials in terms of their potential to do it. Now, potential means they've demonstration of leadership competencies, resiliency, learning agility, ability, and career motivation. Career motivation is kind of key, right? Some people really don't want to take that next level up. Fabulous, okay, right? We need people to do the jobs that they're doing at the really good level that they're doing it. There's many COOs who are like, yeah, really don't want to be an ED. Not my cup of tea, not interested. I am happy where I'm at. Okay, well, we know that. So what does that mean for our organization in terms of that? So what you do is on these, you can take, since it's so small, you can't necessarily read it, but what you'll do is, let's say, a derailing leader. You see somebody in your organization who has so much potential. You can see it in them. You have glimpses of it, and they do some things really well, and yet, on an everyday basis, they're not doing their job, and you know they know how, and you know that they can do it, they're just not doing it. And so something's up, something's not going well, and so they're a derailed leader. This is the person that you need to have that conversation with and say, I see this potential, I see your ability, and tell me what's going on, what's happening, what's going on that you're not performing where you need to perform. Sometimes you might have a capable performer. They have low potential, they've kind of maxed out where they're at in terms of their abilities, and they do okay. So they have medium performance potential, okay? And with each one of these, we've given you some, what it looks like, and then some action required for each one of these. And I know, I'm so sorry. Like valued performer, it says leave in current job, continuing developing, improving performance. Because they're a valued performer. They're kind of medium in terms of potential, medium in terms of performance, keep working on their current job. This is a great tool for you as a leader to take a look at who's on my team, where do they fit, and what do I as a leader need to be doing to support their development, and what does this mean for organizations? So some organizations will do this instead of their replacement planning chart, and some of them do it in combination. They'll do this and then take a look at putting into their replacement planning chart. Questions around the 9-block model? Development planning, we'll just kind of hit some of these. You guys probably know this, and I think there's some key pieces on here. Research says that the most powerful source of development is based on varied and challenging experiences and assignments. Folks learn by doing things, right? That's how you learned. You learned, most of you learned probably with the landmine approach, right? Kind of walking along, you get your job, and you're like, note to self, won't do that one again, right? And then you come around here and you're like, okay, good to know that's not a good experience, right? So most of you, that's how you learned your job, okay? But you learn by doing things, you learn by taking risks, you learn by trying things, right? Your people are going to learn by that same way too. When you're developing them, they don't have to go through some fabulous formal, leadership academy program. If they can, that's great, that's helpful. And how do you give them challenges every day on their job? How do you stretch them? How do you say to them, I'd like for you to lead this task force? And they may go, what? You say, I'm gonna partner with you on it. Let's take a look at what that means. What does it mean to, right? And you're gonna coach them through what that looks like. Or I want you to take on this role within this grant. Really? I don't know, Let's take a look at it. Let's find out what that means. What does that look like? Let's get you some support around it, right? So it's that everyday job development and coaching that you do every single day and hoping to keep developing their skills that gives them that rich experience to learn. The best development satisfies the business needs, okay? So making people better is a byproduct oftentimes, and it also needs, I think with that one, it needs to be probably, dual focus, but you need to run your business, okay? And you need to develop your people. Your people are a cornerstone piece, a critical piece of it. Accountability drives development. Oh, I can't emphasize that one enough. I am kidding. Every leadership academy that I do, I have several layers of accountability, right? They go through a training class, and then I give them an application assignment. And then they have to do the application assignment, and then they have to meet with their mentor 1 month later, and they have to teach their mentor the content of the training class, and they have to share with them their application assignment, right? If I didn't do that, they would not do the application assignment, right? Because life gets busy, and we go to the class, oh, that was great, yay, I had a good time, okay. And then nothing shifts and changes. We've all had that experience, right? Because it's like, I got too much to do, and it's hard to incorporate and make behavioral changes. Put accountability in place. Check in with them. How are you going to do that? How are you going to check in with them so you know how they're doing in terms of their development? Most development happens on the job. The boss is never neutral. Delegation has the biggest impact on development, and abdication and or micromanagement inhibit development. Okay? You may say, well, I trust them to do their job, just let them go. That's nice, and they may appreciate that at some level, but they probably also appreciate you checking in. How are you doing? Okay? And or the micromanagement piece, all of us have had that experience probably, where we have the micromanager. It's not a pretty experience, is it? Yeah.
I noticed one of the things you didn't have on there was access to external support or resources. For example, we use Mountain State's Employers Council, and I recently had a manager who had a difficult situation, and we were talking about it, and I provided a few suggestions and ideas. And then he said, but you had Mountain State's Employers Council. Would you like me to arrange an opportunity for you to talk to someone about it? She said, oh, I would love it. And she came back and said, basically she told me the same thing that you said, that it was so nice to hear someone else validate it.
What is it about that, isn't it? People always say that. I'll come in, I'll be like, I'll share something, and people in the room are like, I've been telling him this for like 6 years, Absolutely. So I love that you said that, Joyce. Having that outside resource, if you've got it, if you've got Mountain States, absolutely use this, because that's what we're here for. The truth is I think you should use each other too. Is how do you guys find that leadership development with each other? How do you build those support networks of ways to, find those resources, or community leadership programs that might be out there that, people can get involved in. Allowing them to be on the board of directors for other things. There's just, I think, a lot of different ways to do that. So thank you. All right. Let me take a quick glance at what questions do you guys have so far. We're at 12:05. So leadership academies, I've kind of mentioned some of these different, I'm going to kind of just quickly go over this in terms of, you put a lot of different things in it, and every academy, I have like 10, I have 5 that have launched right now. I have 5 more ready to launch this summer, and then I have 5 more next year from different organizations, nonprofits to for-profits to city and counties to all over the universities, and every one of them is different. And we use a combination of these different skills and tools to put them together. So if you're at all interested, just let me know. Okay? The last several slides are all around success factors and pitfalls and derailers. So take a look at those, because those are helpful. That's helpful information. All right. What questions do you guys have? I know that was a lot of information. Was that helpful?
Extremely.
Yeah. Extremely. Just to take a look at where to even start. Hopefully, I didn't overwhelm you to the point where you're like, I don't even know where to start. Start at emergency planning. Start identify your key positions. Start at emergency planning and do a replacement planning chart. And then start to take a look at how do I develop my folks and change that culture within your organization. Okay?
For me, it was some affirmation. It's kind of like Joyce said, well, someone outside validated something that you had said. For me, it's validation of a direction that we're going, and here are more tools to help us go that direction.
I would agree. Good, okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much for hanging out.